Victor Gallagher, Boston's most ruthless syndicate boss, was dying. 12 world-renowned specialists stood around his bed, baffled by his rotting organs and rapid decay. They called it an incurable autoimmune failure. But Hannah, a terrified maid earning $8 an hour, saw the lethal truth hiding in plain sight. The Gallagher estate, a sprawling stone fortress, perched on the jagged cliffs of Massachusetts' North Shore, smelled of bleach, expensive mahogany, and impending death. For 3 generations, the Gallagher family had ruled the New England underworld, controlling the ports, the unions, and the underground casinos with a quiet, terrifying efficiency. At 34, Victor Gallagher was the reigning king. He was a man carved from marble and violence, possessing a brilliant, tactical mind and a reputation that made grown men tremble. But kings, as it turned out, could bleed, just like anyone else. 6 weeks ago, Victor had collapsed during a private dinner. What began as mild fatigue rapidly escalated into a horrifying, agonizing descent. Now, he lay trapped in his own master suite, a prisoner in a hospital bed, dragged into the center of a room adorned with Renaissance oil paintings and silk drapes. His once imposing frame had wasted away. His skin was pale and drawn, and an array of humming, blinking medical machines surrounded him like metallic vultures. 12 doctors had been flown in from across the globe. There was Dr. Philip Harrison, the arrogant chief of internal medicine at a prestigious Boston hospital, Dr. Alistair Reed, a brilliant toxicologist from London, and 10 other specialists who commanded thousands of dollars an hour. For weeks, they had run every test known to modern medicine. They drew vials of his blood, ordered endless MRIs, and performed invasive biopsies. They tested for heavy metals, exotic biotoxins, rare tropical parasites, and obscure genetic markers. Every single toxicology screen came back entirely negative. His kidneys are shutting down, his neurological function is deteriorating, and his nerve endings are misfiring. Dr. Harrison announced during a tense meeting in the estate's grand library, adjusting his gold-rimmed glasses. He looked across the heavy oak table at Victor's younger brother, Declan. It perfectly mimics rapid-onset Guillain-Barré syndrome compounded by a rare, aggressive autoimmune nephritis. His body is simply attacking itself. I am sorry, Declan. We have tried plasmapheresis. We have tried high-dose corticosteroids. Nothing is stopping the necrosis. Declan Gallagher buried his face in his hands, letting out a ragged sigh that sounded perfectly, flawlessly devastated. How long? Declan whispered. 48 hours. 72 at the most, Dr. Reed replied softly. You should make the final arrangements. While the doctors delivered the death sentence downstairs, Hannah Jenkins was upstairs, quietly pushing her cleaning cart down the dimly lit, heavily guarded hallway. Hannah was 23, exhausted, and completely invisible. She was a contracted maid, hired through a shell company that serviced the Gallagher estates. She didn't ask questions about the armed men in tailored suits standing at the doors, and she certainly didn't ask about the blood she occasionally had to scrub out of the imported Persian rugs. She kept her head down because she had no other choice. A crushing mountain of medical debt from her late father's battle with cancer, coupled with final eviction notices on her tiny apartment, kept her tethered to this high-paying, terrifying job. Before this, she had worked the graveyard shift at a gritty auto repair shop in South Boston just to make ends meet, a life that felt a million miles away from the gilded walls of the Gallagher mansion. Hannah approached the master suite. Thomas, a hulking bodyguard with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, stepped aside to let her pass. Make it quick, Jenkins. He's resting, Thomas grunted. Yes, sir, Hannah murmured, keeping her eyes glued to the floor. She pushed her car into the massive room. The air was thick and stifling, heavily perfumed by the extravagant bouquets of white lilies that Declan's wife, Sophia, insisted on bringing in daily. The rhythmic hiss-click of the oxygen machine cut through the oppressive silence. Hannah began her routine, moving with practiced silence. She dusted the mahogany dressers, emptied the sterile trash bins of bloody gauze and used syringes, and wiped down the surfaces. As she approached the bed to clean the bedside table, she accidentally bumped her hip against the heavy nightstand. A glass water pitcher rattled loudly. Hannah froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Slowly, Victor Gallagher turned his head on the pillow. His dark, striking eyes fluttered open. Even hollowed out by sickness, his gaze was piercing, predatory, and fiercely intelligent. The 12 doctors saw a failing organism. The Mafia capos saw a dying boss. But as Victor looked at Hannah, she saw a man trapped in a burning building, screaming behind his own eyes. "Water," Victor rasped, his voice a gravelly, agonizing whisper. His hand twitched on the high thread count sheets. Hannah looked around, panic-stricken. The private nurse had stepped out for a smoke break. She wasn't supposed to interact with him, but the sheer desperation in his eyes bypassed her fear. She quickly poured a small cup from the plastic pitcher the nurses used and brought it to his lips, supporting the back of his neck with her small, calloused hand. As he drank, his cold fingers weakly grasped her wrist. The touch sent a strange jolt through her. He didn't look at her with the dismissive arrogance of a billionaire, nor the hazy confusion of a dying man. He looked at her with acute, desperate clarity. "They're wrong." Victor breathed out, his chest heaving as he sank back into the pillows. "Burning. My veins are burning." "The doctors are doing everything they can, Mr. Gallagher," Hannah whispered, her voice trembling. Victor let out a bitter, choked laugh that turned into a wet cough. "Doctors," he wheezed. "Fools. All of them." His eyes rolled back slightly as a fresh wave of agony seized him, and he slipped back into a fitful, feverish unconsciousness. Hannah stepped back, her breath catching. She looked at the array of high-tech monitors, the bags of clear IV fluids, the towering stack of medical charts. 12 of the smartest men in the world said his body was failing naturally, but Victor's whispered words clung to her. "Burning." She shook her head, trying to clear the thought. She was a maid, not a doctor. She turned back to her cart, pulling out the handheld UV sanitation wand she was required to use on all high-touch surfaces to protect Victor's non-existent immune system. As she prepared to clean the adjacent bathroom, Sophia Gallagher swept into the room, bringing a chill in with her. Sophia was flawlessly beautiful, draped in dark designer cashmere, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed despite the supposed family tragedy. She was Declan's wife, and in the weeks since Victor had fallen ill, she had effectively taken over the running of the household. "Oh, you're still in here," Sophia said smoothly, eyeing Hannah with mild distaste. "Finish up quickly. My brother-in-law needs absolute peace." "Almost done, ma'am," Hannah said, averting her eyes. Sophia walked over to the nightstand, completely ignoring the sterile hospital water pitcher Hannah had just used. Instead, Sophia carried a heavy, ornate crystal decanter filled with a pale, pinkish liquid. "I brought his evening hydration," Sophia said, almost to herself, carefully pouring the liquid into a matching crystal tumbler. "The doctors say his kidneys are failing, but this alkaline mineral water from the Swiss Alps is the only thing that seems to soothe his stomach. Declan had it specially imported." She placed the tumbler delicately on the nightstand, right next to Victor's limp hand. "Make sure you don't knock it over, girl. It's incredibly rare." "I'll be careful," Hannah replied. Sophia gave Victor a long, unreadable look. There was no sorrow in it, only a cold, calculating anticipation before turning on her expensive heels and leaving the suite. Hannah watched her go, a strange knot forming in her stomach. The Gallagher family dynamic was terrifying, but the way Declan and Sophia hovered over Victor felt less like a vigil and more like a death watch. Hannah had overheard the hushed conversations in the hallways. If Victor died, the entire syndicate, the billions of dollars in legitimate and illegitimate assets, fell directly to Declan. Hannah pushed her cart into Victor's massive, marble-lined master bathroom. She began her sanitization protocol. She flipped the switch on her heavy-duty UV wand, turning off the overhead bathroom lights so the ultraviolet beam could highlight any bacteria or organic residue on the counters. The marble glowed with a faint, dull purple hue under the wand. Hannah swept the light over the sink, the gold-plated faucets, and the edge of the vanity where Victor's personal items were kept. Suddenly, the UV light hit something on the edge of the sink basin, a few drops of splashed liquid. It didn't glow dull purple. It flared up in a blinding, neon, radioactive green. Hannah frowned, stopping her movements. She passed the wand back and forth. The splattered drops illuminated like glow-in-the-dark paint under a black light. She leaned in closer, confused. Biological fluids like saliva or sweat glowed a faint yellowish blue. Cleaning chemicals glowed white. But neon green? Hannah had only seen that specific fluorescent luminescence in one place in her entire life. The auto repair shop in South Boston. Radiator, coolant, antifreeze. Hannah's heart did a slow, terrifying flip. Ethylene glycol. The primary ingredient in commercial antifreeze was intentionally laced with a fluorescent green dye by manufacturers so mechanics could easily spot engine leaks using a UV blacklight. But why is there antifreeze splashed on the bathroom sink of a billionaire's heavily guarded bedroom? Her hands began to shake as the pieces of a horrifying puzzle started crashing together in her mind. Ethylene glycol was a mechanic's worst nightmare. It was highly toxic, but more dangerously, it was completely odorless and tasted intensely sweet. If ingested, it didn't kill instantly. It metabolized slowly, forming calcium oxalate crystals that shredded the kidneys, caused severe neurological damage, induced agonizing nerve pain, and ultimately led to multi-organ failure. It perfectly mimicked an aggressive, untreatable autoimmune disease. And the world-class doctors? They were running advanced panels for exotic poisons like ricin, arsenic, and thallium. They were looking for sophisticated biological weapons. No Harvard-educated doctor was running a cheap gas station antifreeze test on a Mafia boss. The poison was too low class, too common to even cross their brilliant minds. Hannah clicked off the UV wand, her breathing shallow and ragged. She stepped back into the bedroom. The rhythmic hum of the oxygen concentrator sounded deafening now. She looked at the nightstand. The expensive crystal tumbler filled with the rare Swiss alkaline water Sophia had just poured sat untouched. Hannah checked over her shoulder. The door was closed. The guard was outside. Her hands trembling violently, she walked over to the nightstand, unclipped her UV wand, and shielded it with her body to block the light from the hallway windows. She turned the wand on and aimed it directly at the expensive crystal tumbler. The liquid inside the glass violently erupted in a bright, glowing, toxic neon green. Hannah gasped, clapping a hand over her own mouth to stifle the sound. It wasn't mineral water, it was water heavily laced with commercial antifreeze. Declan and Sophia were slowly, methodically murdering Victor in plain sight, using a $10 chemical while a dozen $1 million doctors watched him die, completely oblivious. Hey! The harsh whisper made Hannah jump out of her skin. She dropped the UV wand, fumbling to catch it before it hit the floor, quickly snapping it off. She spun around. Victor's eyes were open again. He was staring at her, his chest rising and falling heavily. He had seen the glow. He had seen her reaction. What? Victor forced the word out, his jaw clenched in agony. What did you find? Hannah was paralyzed. If she told him, and he lashed out, Declan would know. Declan would kill her. The Mafia didn't leave loose ends, especially not a minimum wage maid who uncovered a coup. She had to walk away. She had to pretend she saw nothing, finish her shift, and disappear. But as she looked into Victor's eyes, she didn't see a ruthless mob boss. She saw the same agonizing, helpless look her father had on his face in his final days, betrayed by his own failing body. Only Victor wasn't being betrayed by his body, he was being slaughtered by his own blood. Hannah took a terrified breath, stepping closer to the bed. She leaned in, her face inches from his, the scent of his feverish skin mixing with the toxic sweetness of the glass beside them. You don't have an autoimmune disease, Mr. Gallagher, Hannah whispered, her voice shaking but her eyes locked onto his with fierce certainty. You're being poisoned. It's in the water your sister-in-law gives you. It's antifreeze. Victor's pupils dilated. A shocking surge of adrenaline seemed to momentarily burn through the haze of his failing organs. The realization hit him not with fear, but with an instant, cold, and terrifying rage. Before he could speak, the heavy brass handle of the bedroom door began to turn. Hide the glass, Victor hissed, his voice suddenly sharp, commanding, and undeniably dangerous. Now, Hannah grabbed the crystal tumbler just as the heavy oak door swung open, and Declan Gallagher stepped into the room. The heavy oak door swung open, and Declan Gallagher stepped into the room. He was a slightly softer, more polished version of his older brother, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that screamed old money. Hannah had a fraction of a second. She didn't hesitate. She shoved the heavy crystal tumbler directly into her plastic waste bin, burying it beneath a pile of discarded, blood-spotted gauze and empty sterile packaging. She immediately grabbed a fresh, folded towel from her cart and began aggressively polishing the brass railing of the hospital bed. What is going on in here? Declan demanded, his voice dropping into a dangerous, suspicious register. His eyes darted from Hannah to Victor, who was lying flat, his chest rising in shallow, uneven intervals. Just sanitizing the bed rails, sir, Hannah stammered, forcing her shoulders to hunch, playing the part of the terrified, invisible maid. Mrs. Gallagher said I needed to be thorough. Declan's gaze lingered on her for a terrifying moment before shifting to his brother. He walked closer, looking down at Victor with an expression that masterfully blended fraternal sorrow with predatory patience. "How are you feeling, Vic?" Victor's performance was flawless. The man was a syndicate boss who had survived gang wars in the Seaport District and federal indictments. He knew how to wear a mask. He let his eyes roll back slightly, releasing a ragged, pathetic groan that rattled in his chest. "Tired, December. So tired," Victor rasped, his hand trembling as it rested on the blanket. Declan patted his brother's leg, a grim smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Rest, brother. The doctors from Mass General are doing everything they can. You just let go and find some peace." Declan turned back to Hannah. "Finish up and get out. He needs quiet." "Yes, sir," Hannah whispered. She grabbed her cart, the poisoned crystal glass safely hidden in the trash, and backed out of the room, her heart hammering violently against her ribs. When she returned at 2 a.m. for her mandatory graveyard sanitation round, the estate was cloaked in heavy silence. The night nurse, a young woman exhausted by the 12-hour shifts, was asleep in the adjoining sitting room, a glowing tablet resting on her chest. Hannah slipped into the master suite, locking the heavy door silently behind her. Victor was awake. The moment she entered, his piercing dark eyes locked onto her. The fever was burning him alive from the inside, but the absolute clarity of his rage kept him lucid. Hannah moved quickly to his bedside. She pulled a small, sealed bottle of generic distilled water from her apron pocket safe, untampered water she had brought from her own apartment, and helped him drink. "Tell me," Victor commanded softly, his voice raw. "Everything." Hannah took a shaky breath. "It's ethylene glycol, antifreeze. It causes calcium oxalate crystals to form in your kidneys, shredding them from the inside out. It mimics aggressive autoimmune nephritis. Your doctors, Dr. Harrison and Dr. Reed, they're looking for complex biological anomalies. They aren't looking for a $10 garage chemical." Victor closed his eyes, a muscle feathering in his clenched jaw. "Declan, my own blood. He and Sophia are expediting my inheritance." He opened his eyes, the look in them so violently cold that Hannah shivered. "I need my men. I need Eric." "You can't," Hannah urged, leaning in closer. "Your brother has restricted all access. There are armed guards from Declan's personal detail at every door. If you raise the alarm now, while you're bedridden, Declan will just smother you with a pillow and call it a heart attack. You have no strength. You need to get better first." "There is no getting better, Hannah," Victor said bitterly, saying her name for the first time. The sound of it on his lips sent an unexpected jolt down her spine. "My kidneys are shutting down. Dr. Reed said my creatinine levels are off the charts. I have days left." "No, you don't," Hannah said, her eyes flashing with a sudden, fierce determination that belonged to the girl who had survived the gritty streets of South Boston. "I used to work in an auto shop. I know about ethylene glycol poisoning because a stray dog drank a puddle of it once, and my old boss saved it. I know the antidote." Victor stared at her, stunned. "An antidote? The chemical itself isn't what's killing you," Hannah explained rapidly, keeping her voice to a whisper. "It's how your liver metabolizes it. We have to stop the enzyme in your liver from breaking down the antifreeze into toxic crystals." She paused, biting her lip. "The medical treatment is a drug called fomepizole. But I can't get that. It's strictly controlled." "What's the alternative?" Victor demanded. "Ethanol," Hannah said. "Pure, high-proof alcohol. It competitively inhibits the enzyme. If we flood your system with high-proof alcohol, your liver will process the alcohol instead, and the antifreeze will just flush out of your system naturally." Victor let out a sound that was half laugh, half cough. "You want to cure my assassination with a bender?" "Exactly," Hannah said, her face dead serious. "Do you have liquor in the house? Something clear, high-proof, and safe?" Victor's eyes gleamed with a sudden dark amusement. "In my private study, behind the mahogany desk, there's a hidden cabinet. Code is 0418, bottom shelf. Beluga Epicure vodka. It's 80 proof and triple distilled. Declan won't have touched it. He only drinks scotch." "I'll get it," Hannah said. "Hannah," Victor whispered, reaching out, his hot, trembling fingers wrapped around her wrist. The sheer strength of his grip was gone, but the intensity of his touch made her breath catch. "If you do this, if you cross Declan, you are in the game. There is no going back to being a maid. If they catch you, they will kill you." Hannah looked down at his hand, then up into his striking, desperate eyes. She thought of her father dying in a sterile ward at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute because they couldn't afford experimental treatments. She had watched one man she cared about die because she was powerless. She refused to watch another man be murdered while she stood by and dusted the furniture. "I've been invisible my whole life, Mr. Gallagher," Hannah said softly, pulling her hand away gently but firmly. "I'm done hiding." Over the next 5 days, a deadly, high-stakes game of shadows played out within the walls of the Gallagher estate. Hannah became Victor's lifeline. Every night, under the guise of deep cleaning the master suite, she smuggled in a crystal flask filled with the Beluga Epicure vodka. Because Victor was hooked up to IV drips and couldn't risk a spiked bag being tested by the nurses, she had to administer it orally. It was an agonizingly slow process. Victor would fake sleep when the nurses were present, and the moment they stepped out, Hannah would be at his side. She would prop up his head, resting his heavy, feverish skull against her shoulder, and slowly tip the vodka into his mouth, alternating it with clean water. The enforced proximity shifted something fundamental between them. During the long, dark hours of the night, while waiting for the alcohol to metabolize, they talked in hushed, breathless whispers. Victor learned about the crushing medical debt that kept her chained to his estate. He learned about her father, a mechanic with a booming laugh who had taught her how to bleed a radiator and change a transmission. In turn, Hannah saw the man beneath the monster. She saw a man who had been groomed for violence since childhood, who carried the weight of a multi-billion-dollar empire, and who was utterly, completely alone despite being surrounded by an army. By the 4th day, the shift was undeniable. The alcohol therapy was working. The competitive inhibition had halted the formation of the toxic calcium oxalate crystals. Victor's body, resilient and remarkably strong, began to flush out the remaining toxins. The burning in his veins subsided. The grey, necrotic pallor of his skin began to fade, replaced by a subtle, returning warmth. But to the world, Victor Gallagher still had to be dying. The latest lab results from Quest Diagnostics just came back. Dr. Harrison announced during a midday briefing in the library, his brow deeply furrowed. He laid the file on the table, looking baffled. "It is unprecedented. The necrosis has completely stalled. His creatinine levels are actually dropping. His kidney function is slightly improving." Declan, sitting at the head of the table, gripped the armrests of his leather chair so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. "Improving?" he echoed, his voice devoid of any joy. "You said his organs were failing. You told me to prepare for a funeral." "I did," Dr. Reed interjected, looking equally bewildered. "Medically speaking, this doesn't make sense. It's as if the autoimmune attack just stopped. But the damage is severe. He is still incredibly weak." Sophia, standing by the window, turned around, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. "Perhaps we should adjust his pain management. If he is lingering, he must be in agony. We should transition him to a morphine drip. Keep him completely sedated." "A morphine drip could depress his respiratory system," Dr. Harrison warned. "He is my brother, Doctor," Declan snapped, slamming a fist onto the table. "I will not let him suffer. Transition him to palliative care. No more tests, no more interventions, just make him comfortable until the end." Upstairs, Hannah had her ear pressed to the heavy oak door of the master suite, listening to the muffled footsteps of the guards pacing the hallway. Victor was sitting up in bed, actually sitting up, unsupported, a feat that would have been impossible 48 hours ago. "They're going to put you on a morphine drip," Hannah whispered, rushing over to the bed. Panic laced her voice. Sophia suggested it. "It's a death sentence, Victor. If they sedate you, you won't be able to drink the vodka. The remaining antifreeze in your tissue will metabolize, and you'll relapse." Victor's eyes darkened, a terrifying, predatory calm washing over his features. The King of Boston was returning. Declan realizes the poison isn't working fast enough. He's moving to a more direct approach. "What do we do?" Hannah asked, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the mattress. Victor reached out, and this time his hand didn't shake. His grip was firm, warm, and possessive as he wrapped his fingers around hers. He pulled her slightly closer. "We strike back," he said, his voice a low, lethal hum. "But I cannot walk past those guards yet. I need another 48 hours to regain my strength. I need a proxy." "A proxy?" "Eric," Victor said, his thumb gently tracing the back of Hannah's hand, a stark contrast to the violence in his words. "My underboss." He operates out of the Venezia import warehouse in the North End. He is entirely loyal to me, but Declan has cut off all my communications. Declan told the syndicate I'm in a coma. Eric won't move against my brother unless he has definitive proof that Declan is behind this. How do we get him proof? Hannah asked. Victor looked toward the bathroom. The UV light. The crystal glass in your trash bin. Did you get rid of it? No, Hannah said quickly. I hid the glass in the false bottom of my cleaning cart. I haven't taken it to the main incinerator yet. Good girl, Victor murmured, the praise sending a rush of heat to Hannah's cheeks. You need to take that glass to Eric. Tell him exactly what you told me. Tell him to run a chemical analysis on the residue. When he sees it's ethylene glycol, he'll know Declan orchestrated this. Hannah swallowed hard. The North End? Victor, I'm just a maid. If I leave the estate during my shift, the gate guards will search my bags. If they find the glass, they won't search the sanitation bins, Victor instructed, his mind operating with tactical brilliance. Wrap the glass in biohazard bags. Stash it in the medical waste removal truck that comes at 4 p.m. Tell the driver you left your purse in the cab and intercept it once it clears the gates. Victor pulled her closer, his face inches from hers. The sterile smell of the hospital room was gone, replaced by the faint, intoxicating scent of the vodka and his own sharp, masculine cologne. Hannah, look at me. She met his gaze, her breath catching. You are risking your life for a man you barely know, Victor said softly, the ruthless Mafia boss entirely stripped away, leaving only a man looking at his savior with raw, unfiltered awe. Why? Because, Hannah whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears, I know what it's like to be discarded by the world, and I won't let them do it to you. Victor lifted his free hand, gently tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. If you make it to Eric, tell him code phrase Black Winter. He will give you whatever you need. If you pull this off, Hannah Jenkins, you will never have to scrub another floor, pay another debt, or fear another man for as long as you live. You have my word? The heavy click of the suite's outer door lock echoed through the room. Hannah ripped her hand from Victor's, just as the bedroom door swung open. Sophia stood in the doorway, a syringe in one hand and a cold, triumphant smile on her lips. Time for your medicine, Victor, Sophia purred. She glanced at Hannah, her eyes flashing with pure malice. And you're fired. Security will escort you off the premises immediately. Get her out of my sight, Sophia hissed, her manicured finger pointing toward the hallway. 2 massive security contractors from Aegis Defense Services stepped into the doorway, their hands resting menacingly on their holstered weapons. Hannah didn't fight them. She dropped her gaze, hunching her shoulders to perfect the image of a terrified, defeated servant. I'm sorry, Mrs. Gallagher, she whimpered, backing out of the room. She risked one final, fleeting glance at Victor. His face was a mask of cold stone, but his eyes burned with a silent, urgent command. Go. As the guards marched her down the grand staircase and toward the service exit, Hannah's mind raced. She had 10 minutes before the Stericycle medical waste truck departed the loading dock. When the guards shoved her out the heavy steel service doors into the biting Boston cold, she stumbled intentionally, falling against the side of the idling disposal truck. Watch it. Trash, one of the guards sneered, turning his back to light a cigarette. In that split second, Hannah reached into the hidden compartment of her abandoned cleaning cart, which the crew had already rolled onto the dock. She grabbed the red biohazard bag containing the crystal tumbler and shoved it deep inside her oversized wool coat. She didn't look back as she hurried down the winding driveway, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. It took Hannah an hour on the MBTA transit line to reach the North End. She navigated the cobblestone labyrinth of Hanover Street, pushing past tourists and locals until she found the Venezia import warehouse. It looked abandoned, its corrugated steel doors rusted and shut tight. Hannah pounded on the heavy side door. A grate slid open, revealing a pair of dark, unforgiving eyes. We're closed, a gruff voice barked. I need to see Eric, Hannah demanded, her voice shaking but her stance entirely unyielding. Tell him it's a code, Black Winter. The grate slammed shut. A moment later, the heavy door groaned open. Hannah was pulled into a dimly lit, cavernous space smelling of espresso, cigar smoke, and gun oil. Standing in the center of the room was Eric, a towering, heavily tattooed enforcer with cold, assessing eyes. Who the hell are you? Eric demanded, stepping into her personal space. And how do you know that phrase? Hannah unzipped her coat and pulled out the red biohazard bag. She slammed the heavy crystal tumbler onto a wooden crate between them. "I'm the maid, cleaning your boss's deathbed," Hannah said, her voice finally steadying into a hard Boston edge. "Victor isn't dying of an autoimmune disease. Declan and Sophia are poisoning him with commercial antifreeze. This glass is covered in it. Test it." Eric stared at her, then at the glass. He gestured to a wiry man in the corner, the syndicate's underground chemist. The man took the glass, swiped a chemical swab against the residue, and dropped it into a vial of testing solution. 10 seconds later, the liquid turned a bright, undeniable, toxic fluorescent green. The air in the warehouse instantly dropped 10 degrees. Eric's expression shifted from suspicion to pure, unadulterated, murderous rage. "Declan told us Victor was in a coma," Eric growled, racking the slide of his Glock 19 with a terrifying metallic clack. He looked around the warehouse at the 24 heavily armed men who had been waiting for a reason to strike. "Mount up. We're taking back the estate." Back at the Gallagher mansion, the atmosphere in the Grand Library was solemn and victorious. Declan stood at the head of the oak table, a gold Mont Blanc pen in his hand. Dr. Harrison and Dr. Reed sat opposite him, looking grim. "The morphine drip has been administered, Dr." Harrison lied flawlessly, a lie bought and paid for by Declan's offshore accounts. "His breathing is slowing. It is only a matter of hours now. If you sign the power of attorney, the transition of the family trust will be seamless." Declan offered a perfectly crafted sigh of mourning. "My poor brother. He fought so hard." He lowered the pen to the heavy parchment. Before the ink could touch the paper, the library doors exploded inward. Splinters of heavy oak showered the Persian rugs as Eric and a dozen tactical enforcers stormed the room, their weapons raised and laser sights painted directly onto Declan's chest. The world-class doctors screamed, dropping to the floor in absolute terror. Sophia, who had been pouring a celebratory glass of champagne in the corner, dropped the bottle. It shattered, the sharp crack echoing through the stunned silence. "Eric!" Declan shouted, his face draining of color. "What is the meaning of this? I am the head of this family now." "No, Declan," a dark, gravelly voice echoed from the hallway. "You're just a disappointing little brother." The room froze. Stepping through the shattered doorway was Victor Gallagher. He was pale, his cheekbones sharp and hollowed from the ordeal, but he was dressed in a pristine, tailored black suit. The King of Boston was not in a coma. He was standing, breathing, and radiating an aura of absolute, terrifying lethality. "Victor!" Declan gasped, stumbling backward until he hit the mahogany bookshelf. The doctors said, "The doctors are idiots," Victor sneered, his cold eyes sweeping over Harrison and Reed, who were cowering on the floor, looking for exotic diseases while my own blood laced my water with engine coolant. Victor walked slowly toward Declan, the silence in the room so heavy it felt suffocating. "A $10 garage chemical deck? Really? If you wanted my throne, you should have used a bullet." "Victor, please," Sophia sobbed, falling to her knees. Victor didn't even look at her. He nodded once to Eric. "Take them to the shipping containers at the harbor. They can experience what it feels like to slowly run out of air." As Eric's men dragged the screaming, pleading couple out of the library, Victor turned his attention to the doorway. Standing just behind the wall of armed guards was Hannah. She looked exhausted, her cheap wool coat dusted with snow, but her chin was held high. Victor walked past the trembling doctors, stepping into the hallway. The ruthless syndicate boss softened entirely the moment his eyes met hers. He reached out, his warm, strong hand gently cupping her cheek, wiping away a stray tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "You came back," Victor whispered, his voice thick with an emotion he had never allowed himself to feel. "I told you," Hannah replied, a weary but brilliant smile breaking across her face. "I'm done being invisible." The 12 world-renowned specialists left Boston in absolute disgrace, their reputations quietly shattered by a 23-year-old maid. Victor reclaimed his empire with brutal precision, but the cold, untouchable king was forever changed. He kept his promise. Hannah never scrubbed another floor. Instead, she stood beside him, not as an invisible servant, but as the fiercely brilliant queen of the Gallagher Syndicate, ruling the very shadows she once feared.